For the purpose of this interview, please state your name and where you were born.
My name is Jan Ludwig. I was born in Liberec, Czechoslovakia on September 17th, 1961.
Okay. Growing up during communism, can you recall an early incident when you recognized the difference of treatment on the account of your political affiliation? And if so, please elaborate.
Well, one of my first recollections of what was going on and the world I was living in and the feeling that there was something wrong with it was day when I came home from school and we were learning bits and pieces about history, and the Soviet Union was supposedly our best and biggest ally protecting us. And so that's what they were teaching us in school. And then I came home and I asked my dad about it, and he told me something totally different. Just the opposite.
What did he tell you?
Well, basically, he told me, and he actually didn't even have to tell me that, but we talked about, it was 1968, when I was 7 years old. The Russian army showed up out of a blue in Czechoslovakia, former Czechoslovakia, now Czech Republic and Slovakia. We talked about that. I was 7 years old. I didn't know what was going on. And talk about basically how the occupation of Czechoslovakia started and how Russians are to blame.
Okay, what kind of hockey opportunities did you have while growing up in Czechoslovakia?
Hockey was, if there was anything good about the communist/socialist system at the time, Czechoslovakia, it was sport, because that was the country's way, because Czechoslovakia was a small country, only had 15 million people at the time, and that was the communist way to show the world how great they were and that they could compete with the big bad Americans and Russians, let's say. So they put a lot of money into sports, and so if there was anything good about that whole system, it was sports.
So there were a lot of opportunities?
I wouldn't say a lot of opportunities, but the opportunities we had was fairly inexpensive at the time, even though we didn't get new equipment or anything like that, but we get kind of hand down old equipment. And so it was pretty affordable to be part of sports at the time.
That's good. Okay. What is your opinion about the Prague Spring? When you were living in Czechoslovakia, what is your opinion about the Prague Spring when you were living in Czechoslovakia, and has your opinion changed at all over time?
Now, are you talking about 1968 or 1989?
1968.
Well, I started it, and I'm glad you asked again, because that wasn't the end of the story, what I told you there. So my strongest recollection was, as I said, waking up as a 7-year-old and Russian tanks driving all over the streets of my hometown, Russian MiGs. Their jet planes doing loops above my hometown, intimidating people getting shot in the streets. There was what happened in Liberec, my hometown. Russians made a circle with their tanks at the plaza. The plaza you've probably seen when you visited your grandma and grandpa.
Yeah.
and they made a circle out of the tanks. And long story short, one of the soldiers took a machine gun out, and there were masses of Czech people surrounding the tanks, telling them, yelling at them, "Go home, we don't want you here." And the young soldier took a machine gun and basically went around with a round and killed a whole bunch of people. So what I remember about that was going to the mass funeral for the people who got shot. And then after that, starting in 1968 until 1981, when I emigrated, I remember the lie. We were living there pretending that, Russians were our friends, even though majority of the Czech people hated them because they did so much
because
harm.
of their horrible things. Yeah. Okay. How were you treated by government officials in Czechoslovakia?
Well, it was just a one big lie. They knew they played the game for the sake of their own advancement or their family's advancement. So the ones who wanted to be in a good books, they signed up to be part of the Communist Party at the time, and they got a preferential treatment. And the ones like our family who my parents never got involved with the Communist Party, we were in the bad books. On top of it, some of our relatives emigrated earlier on, so we were basically considered a family of immigrants, and they kind of more or less left us alone. But for example, my oldest sister was very smart. I had a hard time getting into university, even though she passed the exams with a flying colors. And so as far as treatment from the officials, it wasn't very good. But it wasn't like we were suffering physically or anything like that.
Isn't it true that your sister was striving to be a teacher, and when you defected from the country, she was no longer allowed to be a teacher?
Well, nobody ever told me that story, Max. I hope that's not the case. Maybe they didn't tell me purposely so I wouldn't be upset, but never heard that story. But I know she had a hard time getting into university. It took her a few tries, where I think she finally was just so successful that they, after a few years of trying, let her in.
Okay. How were the conditions so bad in Czechoslovakia that you felt you had to drop everything and leave the country?
It wasn't the conditions, Max. It was just from very early on in my life, and especially after, I believe, in 1976, I got an opportunity to go play hockey with the Czech junior national team, which I made, to go play hockey in Canada in preparation for the European Championship. And when I saw the freedom and the smiles on the people's faces and the whole country in general, the nature, and it seemed like everybody was happy. I was watching people walking on the street and the honesty between young people and older people, and the little I understood in English. When I saw that was the breaking point. But from very early on in my life, I always felt kind of like I didn't fit, because I was always in trouble of some kind. Some of it my own doing, but a lot of it just, it was against the the rules they set up for us there, and you couldn't really think for yourself. They didn't want you to. You couldn't ask honest questions. Everybody was kind of pretending. They were pretending. We were pretending, so nobody got in trouble. And I could just feel that from very early on. So that was the main motivation.
So you were being oppressed?
Well, yeah, my mind, like I told you, I went to school where they were teaching me lies about basically everything, about especially history, how things came down, Second World War, and you know, basically I quickly realized that unless I play the game and play the lie and believe in the lies and repeat the lies, that I'm always going to have a hard time in that country.
Okay. Please tell me about how you were able to attain a visa to go to Yugoslavia.
That's a funny story. Now, at the time, it wasn't so funny. I was 18 years old, and you know, I was playing pro hockey. Actually, well, they didn't call it pro hockey, but because they had us signed up in a factory as a workers, but we were getting paid for some other work. But basically, I was playing hockey and getting paid for it. But that was another communist lie. So I was playing pro hockey since I was 16 years old, and I was supposed to go to the army. There was a 2-year mandatory army service at the time in Czechoslovakia.
At the age of 18?
Sorry?
At the age of 18?
Yes.
Okay.
Age of 18, everybody was supposed to go to the army for 2 years of a mandatory army service. So I had all of my papers on the way, and I decided to emigrate about a year before. So I was already midst of my plan, and actually 2 years before. At about 16, I decided I was going to emigrate. And actually, I should backtrack. When I was in Canada, playing for the Czech national team, I was close to emigrating, but I realized that I was only 16, and if I did, that my parents would probably get locked up because I wasn't an adult. You become an adult at 18 in Czechoslovakia at the time. So I returned from Canada, but my mind was made up, and I knew that the only way to emigrate from Czechoslovakia at the time, or one of the few ways, was through Yugoslavia. So I started selling off everything I had to my name, which wasn't much at the time, but I sold my every little piece of my belongings. I had an old motorcycle I sold. I had some old skis. I had a guitar. I started selling my hockey equipment, which that was kind of weird to everybody. They kept asking me why I'm selling it, and I said, well, I'm going to the army, and I'm probably going to play for an army team, so they're going to give me equipment there. But I was selling it to get enough money so I could buy this tourist, was like a vacation to Yugoslavia from this tourist outfit. So which I did, and then went on a regular trip as a tourist by bus to Yugoslavia.
Okay, why was it easier to defect from Yugoslavia than Czechoslovakia?
Yugoslavia was, even though it was socialist / communist at the time, their president, his name was Tito, Tito, I believe is the spelling. He wasn't a big fan of Russians because Russians threatened, I believe, Yugoslavia with the same stuff they did to Czechoslovakia. They threatened to occupy them and take over. And he told them that if they ever cross their border, there's going to be a war. They're not just going to lie down. And so he wasn't a big fan of Russian. So for that matter, there were few ways to emigrate through Yugoslavia into the free world, which was, the neighboring Austria. And that was my plan, and that's what I did.
Okay. Were you caught when you attempted to cross the Yugoslavian border?
Yes, I didn't. I was young, I was 19 years old, and I didn't really know how to do it because when I was in Czechoslovakia, I couldn't just go and ask somebody, how do you emigrate? So a lot of people emigrated, but nobody really passed on how it's done. So not to make the story too long, um, basically my plan, the first plan was to cross the mountains in Yugoslavia from Yugoslavia to Austria, and if I got caught, to pretend that I was just a tourist who got lost. So we tried that, and I had a couple friends with me, and we hiked up to the mountains, and we were trying to cross the border on foot, but we got caught in the emergency zone. There's like a mile before the border and mile past the border. Nobody's supposed to step in, which we didn't know. So it was raining, and I was getting some firewood. We stopped in this little barn to dry off and make a fire. And I stepped out to get some firewood, and I had two Yugoslavian soldiers pointing machine guns at me, telling me to put my hands up. And so, yeah, we got caught. We got taken into these army barracks and interviewed, and eventually taken to town, the nearest town, and locked up in jail for the night. And then in the morning we had more interviews regarding, what we're doing in the emergency zone. And then basically we got told to leave the country. They gave us 24 hours to return to Czechoslovakia. And there's a story after that if you want to hear.
Okay. What did you think was going to happen after you were arrested?
We were scared because we had no idea what was going to happen. Mm-hmm. But a good thing happened during this process. One of the young soldiers told us that we could go to Ljubljana, which is this big city in Yugoslavia, and go to Austrian consulate and buy a transit visa, 24-hour transit visa, which would allow us to travel through Austria to Czechoslovakia. So that's what we did. I had my grandpa's old wedding ring, and kind of like this. And I went to the jewelry store, sold it, and that gave us just enough money to buy this transit visa. And we went to the Austrian consulate, bought a transit visa, got on a train in Yugoslavia, and then about midnight we got to Vienna, Austria, and that was the first time I was in a free world.
Yes. What was your experience while in Yugoslavian jail?
Wasn't fun. They took our shoelaces, our belts, so we couldn't, hang ourselves. The jail was just I don't know, cement room with bars on it. I guess like most jails, with bars in the windows, wooden bench with I don't even know if it had a blanket. I think it had a blanket of some kind, and a hole in the ground to go to the bathroom, and that was it. It wasn't a fun place, especially when you're fairly young
and afraid.
Yeah, we're afraid. Yeah.
Okay. What was your initial reaction when you reached Tracikaran? Yes.
So during this process, when we landed in Vienna, middle of the night by the train, again, we didn't really know what to do from that point on. So I started asking around. I spoke limited German, and they told us we have to go to this refugee camp called Treiskirchen, which was kind of suburbs. I don't know how far from Vienna, not very far. And so we got there, and they were these huge lineups because what happened was the same year they opened up the border in Poland to let people emigrate. Whoever wanted to emigrate, they had the opportunity. So there was 60,000 Polish immigrants. There were some Russians and Bulgarians there too, immigrants. So we got in the line, and after about 2 days of waiting and sleeping in a street not to lose our spot, our turn came and they signed us up. We told them our story, and they gave us like army utensils 3 times a day. You came to this little window. They would put some food in your army utensils, porridge, and give you an apple or something. And that was sort of, that went on for a few months. And then I ended up digging ditches because we had no money for some phone company, just to make a little extra money. We weren't supposed to work, but I got some work on for cash. Mm-hmm. And that went on for quite a few months.
What were the conditions? Were the conditions in Trazikhan as bad as I read about? In the articles I read, they said the camp was vastly overpopulated, and there was a large amount of crime.
Yeah, it was, as I said, I mean, you put 60,000 people into these old army barracks. I don't know if it was 60 or 40. I don't want to over exaggerate. I heard 60, but maybe it wasn't. There was like the camp itself. There was just a series of old army barracks, these humongous buildings where they had all these people stashed in, and they had like every hallway had a bunker bed in them, steel bunker beds, just side by side, and people sleeping in the hallways. For us, I mean, the friends and myself, we were single, we didn't have kids, so it wasn't great, but it wasn't as bad as I felt bad for the families. There were families who had little kids, sleeping in the hallways. And so the conditions were pretty rough, but I mean, when you have a dream, you're willing to pay the price. But the good thing happened. Basically, when we went for one of the interviews, I said we were all related somehow as a family with my friends, and so they started considering us as a family, and then they moved us into some was like not a hotel, but let's call it hotel in Austrian mountains. Mm-hmm. They had a system set up because the camp was overflowing with immigrants, so they had a system set up that some of the hotels would get a bit of money from the Austrian government if they took immigrants in, and in exchange, like, we had to sign up that we are going to work a little bit for, if they asked us at the hotel there. So basically, that's what happened. After probably about 4 or 5 months, we ended up in some hotel in Austrian mountains, which was awesome.
Okay. When did you begin to attempt to get a visa to go to Canada?
For I'd say about 6 to 8 months. I didn't know where they would allow us to emigrate to. So after a few months, I should say, we got 3 options. They told us we could emigrate to New Zealand, Austria, or Canada. And initially, I wasn't even thinking about playing hockey because I didn't think I was going to be good enough to play professional hockey in Canada. So my plan was to be a lumberjack in Alaska and live in the bush and, you know, cut down trees because I didn't know. I was pretty young and naive. So anyways, long story short, when they gave us the choices, I started thinking, maybe I give a hockey shot. Maybe you never know. So we picked Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And then it took another long time because they have to check out your history, make sure you're not a Russian spy or a communist spy. So they had to go through the process. But in the meantime, I called up my aunt and uncle who emigrated in 1968 to Edmonton, and I called them up and I asked them if they could get in touch with the Edmonton Oilers, which was a professional team in Edmonton.
Mm-hmm.
And they did that, and then the Edmonton Oilers found my name in some book because the year before we won the European Championship. So they found my book, my name in some hockey book, and one day phone rang, and basically the general manager of the Edmonton Oilers was on a phone and through translator, because I didn't speak English at the time at all. He offered me, he said, I remember like today, he said, are you willing to sign amateur tryout with us if we pay for your airline tickets and put you up in a hotel in Edmonton? And I thought it was a joke, you know. I said, what do you mean, are you willing to? Because I had a pair of jeans and a t-shirt and no money. So long story short, I said, of course I'm willing to sign up a tryout. And so I did, and they ended up paying for our airline tickets and got us to Edmonton, and that's where my hockey story started in Canada.
Okay. Tell me, tell me about your wedding with your first wife.
Oh, well, it was a big part of it was we were friends. We studied together. We emigrated together. We learned throughout this emigration process that basically they don't like single people coming out to Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Or America at the time, because if say two single people come out and they split up, then the government is on hook to support through unemployment two people. If people are married, chances are that one person has a job and can support the other person. So basically they let us know that they really don't want single people emigrating. And so we decided basically to get married, that it'd be easier to get to Canada. And so we filled out the paperwork, went to some of the officials' house actually, and he said he told us in German that he was basically marrying us, and that's how we got married.
Okay. What was your initial feeling when you moved to Canada?
Well, the very initial feeling when I got off the plane in Edmonton was I was in a bit of a shock, because the Edmonton International Airport is about 45 minutes out of town, sort of in a totally flat, everything in a prairie, totally flat. And all what I could see was snow. And at the time, it was the day when we arrived in Edmonton was minus 48 degrees Celsius.
Wow. That's very cold.
That'd be like, well, I don't know what it's exactly in Fahrenheit. I think it starts evening out. It's probably like, say, minus 40 Fahrenheit. But so let me put it this way. It was so cold that you couldn't even walk on a street without your eyelashes freezing together. It was, people would just run from like a door to door because if your skin was exposed for more than probably 5 seconds, you'd get like burnt. That's how cold it was. So that was my,
Wow.
yeah.
Okay. At this point, when you first arrived in Canada, did you miss your family?
Well, of course I did. I mean, you know, who wouldn't? But again, you know, there was no turning back. I knew that if I ever went back at the time to Czechoslovakia, that I was in big trouble. They would lock me up and throw away the key.
Okay. So, what were you saying?
He asked me if I missed my family, and I said, of course. But you know, I was on a mission basically to get to Canada at that point, and so I didn't have too much time to think about it. I wrote letters here and there to my family, and but of course I missed my family.
Yes. Compared to Czechoslovakia, what kind of opportunities did you have for hockey in North America?
As soon as I got to Edmonton, as I told you, and the Edmonton Oilers got me to Canada, when I walked off the plane, there were cameras everywhere, you know, because at the time, players coming from Eastern Europe, that was very unusual still. And so there are cameras everywhere, which I was in a bit of a shock. And they took me into the Edmonton Oilers dressing room where there was a young Wayne Gretzky sitting there. I'm sure you heard of him. He was arguably one of the best, well, not the best player who ever played the game. We were the same age. He was 19. They took a bunch of pictures of us together, and which again I was in shock because I didn't consider myself any star or anything. And then they gave me about a week to, you know, get in shape, and I was digging ditches for almost a year. So after about a week of skating, they sent me to their junior team because I was still young enough to play junior hockey.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up playing junior hockey in the city of Kamloops, British Columbia. And it was a very good junior league. It was kind of like semi-professional. We were getting a little bit of money to play. And the opportunities in Canada as far as hockey are endless because hockey is, you know, like a religion in Canada.
Yeah. Please tell me about your junior hockey career. Like, was it good, bad, or what was it like?
Well, again, initially it was a bit of a shock because it was a totally different style of hockey. It was very physical, a lot of hitting, a lot of fighting. You know, fighting is part of hockey in North America, which I never seen a hockey fight before, but I quickly realized that that's just part of hockey here. And in all, it was a great experience. Initially, I struggled a little bit because I didn't play for about a year and a half. I didn't play hockey, so I was out of shape and out of touch. And once I got my bearings under me, then I did well, and that sort of set me up for the professional hockey.
Okay, how did you eventually get drafted onto the New Jersey Devils?
I never got drafted. I basically got another tryout. New Jersey Devils approached me once my tryout expired with the Edmonton Oilers. Edmonton Oilers at the time, they were so loaded with talent that I knew I wasn't going to play there anytime soon. And so New Jersey Devils gave me a tryout and ended up signing me after a few days to play for them.
Okay, tell me in detail about your professional hockey career with the New Jersey Devils and later the Buffalo Sabres.
In detail, well, that'd be a long story, buddy, but I will tell you in, how about if I do it in semi-detail?
Okay, that sounds fine.
Playing in the NHL is a big privilege. For me, it was always a secret dream. Of course, like I told you, I didn't think I was going to be good enough to do that, even though I had some success in Europe. I just never thought that I would actually achieve the goal of playing in the NHL. But I worked hard, in the off season and during my junior career. So when I got the opportunity, I had to kind of step up my game. My first year in professional hockey, I really struggled. I kind of knew that I wasn't good enough to be there, but I think they kept me there, the management and the coach, because I worked hard and I probably, they could see that I really wanted it bad. But, so after my first year, which was a struggle, I committed myself to hardcore conditioning, went back in the off season and trained like crazy 3-4 times a day.
Mm-hmm.
And really built myself up to be, I always figured the least I can do was to be in incredible shape, and then if they see it, at least they're going to say this guy really wants it. And I showed up for a training camp. I won all the physical testing and stuff like that, and that showed them I really wanted to be there. And strange thing happened was that, because of my conditioning, my game really improved. And that sort of was the secret I learned.
Okay.
To be in shape. Real good shape.
My final question. Do you regret leaving your family, even though the conditions were so bad in Czechoslovakia? Or do you have no regrets and are happy with the way your life turned out?
I have zero regrets, buddy, even though it was hard at the time, because nobody wants to leave their family. Your mom, my sister, was just a little kid, and when I immigrated, and of course it was hard leaving her, my parents, my older sister, but the biggest benefit from my immigration is that all of my kids were born, in one of them in America and one in Canada, and 4 of them in Canada, and their life is that's like a huge gift to live in the United States or Canada. And as far as myself, no, I have zero regrets. That was the best decision I ever made, because if I didn't emigrate, chances are I'd probably be dead now already anyways, because just like I said, I was always in trouble. I didn't see much of a future there, and so it was the best decision I ever made in my life.
Okay. Okay, do you knowingly permit that Keeling Middle School uses the information you just provided me for educational purposes and online publication?
Of course I do, but it's going to cost you a lot of money.
I am aware that the information I provide may be edited and published in a publicity accessible online archive at firsthandhistory.net.
No problem.
Okay, thank you.